The moment I heard the words, "Immigration Police," I was still holding the flowers over my father's casket. My hands trembled. The white lilies shook in the trembling grip of a son who had crossed countries, borders, and decades for this single farewell. My heart didn't understand what was happening, but my gut did. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I looked up from the coffin and scanned the room. People began whispering. The priest paused mid-prayer. Then I saw him. My brother, Rogerio. He stood a few feet away near the last pew, acting surprised, eyes wide open, mouth half open like he had no clue. But my eyes were faster than his act. I had just seen him closing his phone. He looked away quickly, but not quickly enough. It wasn't just my body that froze in place. My soul did too. That church in Newark had seen many funerals before, but not like this. Not with agents pushing through the doors in black jackets, guns holstered, voices loud and echoing off the stained glass windows. They moved with certainty, like they weren't just chasing a rumor. They had a name, they had a face, they had mine. The lilies fell from my hand as one of them called it out loud, my full name. I was being arrested at my father's funeral, surrounded by crying relatives, confused mourners, and the priest who looked like he had forgotten every verse of scripture. My mother screamed. My nephew burst into tears. And Rogerio just stood there, unmoving, like a statue, carved in. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a random check. This was planned, timed, executed like a sentence written long before the coffin was even ordered. They knew exactly where I would be, what time, and why I wouldn't run. Because who runs from their own father's funeral? Who expects to? They cuffed me in front of everyone. The cold metal around my wrists didn't hurt nearly as much as the shame, or the disbelief, or the piercing look of an elderly woman I didn't recognize whispering to her daughter as if I were some kind of criminal. I wanted to scream, I'm not a criminal. I'm a son. I'm a worker. I came here for one last goodbye. But no one listens to you when the cuffs are on. I walked past my father's coffin, escorted by strangers in uniforms, and I couldn't even whisper a final prayer. I couldn't even touch the wood one last time. I passed my mother, who tried to reach for me, but was held back by two family members who didn't want her to get in. Trouble, too. And Rogerio? He looked at me like I was an inconvenience, like I had ruined the day. His own brother. 20 years in this country, 20 years of silence, of waking up at 4 a.m. to clean offices no one would ever thank me for, of scrubbing dishes in restaurants where no one even learned my name, of walking for hours to save bus fare, of sending money home every single month without fail. Rent, food, medicine, tuition, I gave it all. And this is what I got back. My own brother. Blood. My delivering me into the hands of ICE like a package. I always thought betrayal would come with a fight, with harsh words, with years of distance, not with a click of a phone button inside a church while I cried over our dead father. Rogerio didn't just steal my goodbye. He didn't just expose me. He pierced through everything I had protected with silence. My dignity, my sacrifices, my hope that one day our family would come back together. And yet, as I sat in the back of the IC van, staring out at the church as it grew smaller and smaller, I still hoped. I hoped there was some mistake, that maybe he didn't know what would happen, that maybe he hadn't meant for it to go this far, that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't really him. But I knew it was, because he had asked for money 3 weeks before, said it was for a family emergency, something about my father's medical bills. He sounded desperate. I told him I was saving what little I had left to fly out for the funeral. He went, silent. And now, here I was. There are betrayals that cut deeper than words, that leave wounds invisible to the eye but heavy in the bones. And nothing prepares you for the sound of handcuffs closing on your wrists in the same place where your father's body lays cold and still. So if you've ever sacrificed for your family and feared that one day they might not see your worth, remember this moment, because sometimes the ones you trust the most are the ones holding the knife, and sometimes that knife finds you in the most sacred of places. Tell me, have you ever felt betrayed by someone who should have protected you? Leave a comment below with the words, "I gave everything," and got silence back. Your story could give strength to someone else going through the same. And if you believe these stories deserve to be told so they don't happen in silence again, subscribe to the channel. Here, your pain is not invisible. Here, your voice matters. I arrived in the United States in the spring of 2004. I still remember the air that night, thick with heat and fear. I was 21 years old with a single backpack, 2 changes of clothes, and a heart filled with something that looked like hope. I crossed the border through the desert, walking in silence with strangers who shared the same desperation in their eyes. Our feet blistered, our mouths dry, but we kept walking. Because when you leave everything behind for a dream, turning back is not an option. I came because my father could no longer work the fields in Pernambuco. His back had bent from years of hard labor. I came because my mother's health was deteriorating, because my younger brother Rogerio was still in school, and someone had to step up, and I did. I was not chasing luxury. I was chasing responsibility. I came not for me, but for them. The first job I ever had in the U.S. was washing dishes in a small pizzeria in Newark. I didn't speak English. I didn't understand the menu, but I understood hunger. I understood survival. I worked 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, scraping grease off pans until my fingers cracked. I would sleep on the floor of an apartment I shared with 5 other men, none of us with beds, just old blankets layered over tile. Every dollar I earned was folded with care. I kept a notebook where I wrote down every transfer I made back home. $500 this month, $600 the next. If I made more, they got more. Sometimes, after rent and food, I was left with less than $20 for myself. But I told myself, this is what a good son does. This is what love looks like when spoken through sacrifice. There were nights I walked home an hour in the snow just to save the cost of the bus. I skipped meals so I could send an extra 20. I watched co-workers buy new shoes while mine were patched with tape. I missed birthdays, funerals, anniversaries. I didn't see my nephew grow his first tooth. I only knew through blurry photos sent over slow internet connections. In 2007, I got a second job cleaning office buildings at night. I'd work at the pizzeria from morning till evening, then change into a uniform and mop floors until dawn. My body ached, my eyes burned. But every time I sent money, I felt useful, like I still belonged to my family even if I was thousands of miles away. Sometimes I would call home and my mother would cry. She'd say how proud she was, that my father always talked about me in the village, that even the neighbors asked about the son, who had gone to America to save them. It made every pain worth it. I felt seen, needed, loved. But slowly, the calls started changing. They stopped asking how I was doing, stopped telling me about their lives. The conversation narrowed to a single topic: money. Can you send more this month? Rogerio needs new books. The roof is leaking. We want to repaint the house. Your cousin just got a motorcycle. Maybe you could help? I didn't complain. I told myself, this is the life I chose. Become the provider. That I had, the invisible hero. But inside, a small part of me started to wonder when it would be enough, when I would be allowed to keep something for myself, when I would matter not just for what I gave, but for who I was. In 2010, I was offered a promotion. The pizzeria was expanding, and they needed a night shift manager. I accepted, hoping it would finally give me some breathing room. I rented a small studio apartment, just for me. 1 mattress, 1 window, 1 old table, but it was mine, the first space I had ever owned by myself. I took a photo and sent it to my family. I thought they would be happy, that they would celebrate with me, but the reply came quickly and cold. That's nice. Does that mean you can send more now? No congratulations, no questions about how I felt, just a request, a transaction. The worst part is, I still sent it. I increased the amount, because I couldn't bear the thought of being called selfish, because I was afraid of losing them. Guilt has a way of sounding like duty when it comes from the ones you love. Years went by like that. Work, send, work, send. I started developing back pain. I had no health insurance, no savings. I was living paycheck to paycheck in a country I had spent a decade building a life in, and yet I felt like I had no life at all. In 2016, my mother fell ill. Diabetes, they said. Complications. I took extra shifts, skipped meals, I sent $1,000 that month. When I finally asked Rogerio to help, to maybe cover something himself, he said he didn't have the means. That I was the one in America. I was the one who had the duty. As if the years had written a contract I never agreed to. I started seeing things more clearly. The messages always came near the end of the month. The calls only when they needed something. It wasn't a relationship anymore. It was a transaction dressed in family ties. I kept going, because what else could I do? I never questioned them, never doubted the EDI numbers they gave me, never asked for receipts. That would be disrespectful. That would be cold. But they never thought twice about demanding, about pushing, about saying, "You owe us." I owed them nothing, and yet I gave everything. If you've ever carried the weight of your whole family on your back and still felt invisible, please take a moment to leave a comment below saying, "I carried us all and no one saw me." Your words could be the mirror someone else needs today. And if these stories speak to your soul, if they echo even a little bit of your own silence, hit subscribe. In this space, we don't let quiet pain stay buried. Here, we remember you. Rogerio used to follow me everywhere when we were kids. He was 3 years younger, but always trying to catch up. If I climbed a tree, he climbed higher. If I ran, he ran faster. We would race across the sugarcane fields near our house in Pernambuco, barefoot, laughing so hard we couldn't breathe. I still remember his skinny legs covered in dust, his voice calling out wait for me as I ran ahead. We were brothers. We were friends. At least, we used to be. That was before I left, before the distance crept in like rust on metal. Slow, silent. I thought we were just growing apart because of time, because of life. I thought he understood, that he saw the sacrifices I made, but I was wrong, and I didn't see it coming. Sometimes resentment grows in silence, watered by jealousy, fed by unspoken comparison. States, when I moved to the United, was still in school. I sent money to cover his books, his clothes, even his bike. I told him one day he would make it too, that I was paving the road so he wouldn't have to walk it barefoot like I did. But somewhere along the way, something changed in his voice. It became sharper, less curious, more calculating. He started calling only when he needed something. His messages were short, transactional. "Bro, I need 300 for this. Bro, send it quick." He stopped asking how I was doing. He never once asked if I was okay, if I was eating, if I was tired. I began to feel like a wallet with legs. And the worst part was I kept answering. I kept sending. Because I remembered that boy in the fields. Because I believed he was still in there somewhere. When my father got sick the first time in 2015, I was the one who paid for every medical exam. Rogerio said he couldn't handle it alone, that life was too expensive, that things were different now. I understood. I didn't judge. But then I saw photos on social media. Him at parties, new clothes, trips with friends. He had a new phone. I still had a flip phone that barely worked. He was living, and I was surviving. And yet, I kept giving. Then came the comments, small ones, passive, poison, wrapped in sugar. "You act like you're American now. You forgot where you came from. Must be nice living your little dream up there." I would try to explain that it wasn't a dream, that I was working 15 hours a day just to pay bills and keep them afloat. But my words never landed. He didn't want to understand. He wanted to believe I had abandoned them, that I had chosen a new life, one without them. Resentment is dangerous when it's mixed with pride, and Rogerio had both. I remember one call where I told him I was thinking of going back home to visit, that I missed everyone, that maybe I could surprise Dad on his birthday. There was silence on the line. Then he said, "You think that will fix everything?" "Fix what?" I asked. "Everything you left behind," he replied. "You don't just come back after all these years and pretend it's all good." I didn't know what to say. I had never pretended it was all good. I had been surviving, fighting, sacrificing. But to him, I had escaped. I had left. And in that moment, I felt the gap between us become a canyon. I started noticing patterns. Every time I said no to a request or asked for time to gather money, he would lash out, call me selfish, say I'd changed. Once, he even told me Dad was disappointed in me, that I only cared when it was convenient. I asked to speak to Dad, but he said he was resting. Later, I found out He had never told Dad about that call. He had lied. There is a kind of grief that comes with watching someone you love morph into someone you no longer recognize. That boy chasing me through the cane fields was gone, replaced by a man with eyes that saw me not as a brother, but as an opportunity. He stopped calling me by name. He called me gringo as a joke. Sometimes he would laugh about how American I sounded, said I had forgotten our language, that I had lost my roots. It hurt more than I let on, because I never left my roots. They lived inside me every day I scrubbed a plate. Every morning I woke up before the sun. Every night I walked home in the cold with cracked shoes and empty pockets. Still, I kept trying. I kept sending messages. I kept hoping the next call would sound different, warmer, but it didn't. He grew colder, sharper, more afraid of asking the hard questions. Why don't you call unless you need something? Why do you make me feel like a stranger? Why does it feel like I lost my brother and just didn't notice when it happened? One day, he asked for a large sum, said it was urgent, that our mother was in bad shape and needed medicine. I sent the money without hesitation. 2 days later, I got a message from my cousin, who had just seen our mother at the market, laughing, walking, carrying bags, healthy, no sign of any emergency. When I confronted Rogerio, he didn't even deny it. He just said, I had my reasons. That was all. No apology, no explanation, just silence that tasted like betrayal. I told myself maybe he was lost. Maybe life had hardened him, that if I just kept giving, he would come back to me. But generosity doesn't fix poison. It just feeds it. When Dad passed away, I knew I had to go. I didn't care if it was risky. I didn't care if immigration waited at the airport. I had to say goodbye. I had to see his face one last time. I thought maybe the funeral would bring us back together. That standing side by side in grief would erase the distance. But standing in that church, holding flowers for my father's casket, I saw the truth in my brother's eyes, cold, calculating, watching me like a man who had already made his decision. He wasn't there to mourn. He was there to finish what he started. And he did. If you have ever watched someone you love change into a stranger and felt that quiet heartbreak no one talks about, please share it in the comments with the words, I lost them slowly. And if this story speaks even a little to your pain, consider subscribing. Here, you are not alone in your silence. Here, we speak what others fear to say. The church had always felt like a place of peace to me. Even after all the years away, even knowing the risks of being seen, I walked into that building with my head low and my heart wide open. The scent of incense, the wooden pews, the creak of the old doors as people entered. It was all familiar. It felt sacred. I had come not as a man with papers or status, not as an immigrant or worker. I came as a son, a grieving son. My father's casket was at the front of the altar, polished wood, simple, no gold, no show. Just the kind of man he was, humble, dignified, the kind who would work with his hands all day and still have a smile when he came home. I stood there for a moment before anyone else arrived, just me and him. I whispered that I was sorry, that I wished I could have been there sooner, that I hoped he had forgiven me. The flowers I carried trembled in my hands, not just from the cold, but from the weight of everything I had never said. I placed them gently on top of the casket. White lilies, his favorite. I chose them because my mother once told me they reminded him of the ones that grew wild near our home when he was a boy. As people started arriving, I kept to the side, nodding at familiar faces, faces that had aged while I was gone. Some looked at me with warmth, others with confusion, a few with something that felt like judgment, but I didn't care. I was here to bury my father, not to explain my absence to those who never reached out. Then I saw Rogerio, standing near the last row, wearing a black suit that looked too expensive for the job he claimed he had. He didn't come over. He didn't even smile. He just stood there, phone in hand, typing something quickly and glancing toward the gate's front like he was counting the minutes. His eyes met mine for a second, cold, blank. Then back to his screen. I should have known something was wrong. The priest began the service. He spoke about sacrifice, about love, about the kind of man my father had been. I held my breath through every word, swallowing emotions that burned my throat. My mother sobbed beside me. I reached for her hand. She squeezed it tightly, like she was drowning, and I was the only piece of land left. I didn't notice the Movement at the back of the church right away. Not until I heard the click of a door. Then, footsteps. Not the hesitant kind of someone late to a funeral. These were heavy, purposeful. A woman 2 rows behind me gasped. I turned and saw them. Black jackets. No uniforms, but I knew who they were. ICE doesn't wear badges on their chest. They wear them in their walk, in the way their eyes scan a crowd like reading a file. They walked straight past the pews, past the mourners, past the flowers, and candles, right toward me. I froze. One of them spoke my full name, loud, firm, as if it were a crime to be said out loud. You are under arrest for immigration violations. Please stand and place your hands behind your back. It didn't feel real. For a moment I thought, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had the wrong person. I had lived under the radar for 2 decades. I moved carefully. I avoided risk. I never drew attention to myself, but they knew my name. My mother screamed. My knees buckled toward the casket like it could protect me. Like my father's presence could stop what was happening. Rogerio was standing now, his phone gone, his face a mask of shock. But I saw the flicker, the slight movement in his jaw. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening. He had planned it, timed it. He called them while standing in this church, while I cried over the man we both called Father. I tried to speak. I wanted to say goodbye. I wanted to at least touch the casket one last time. But the agents were already pulling my hands behind my back, cold steel against warm skin. The cuffs were too tight. My wrists burned. My dignity crumbled. People watched in silence. Some looked away. Others pulled out phones. I could hear the clicks of pictures being taken. In that moment, I was no longer a son or a brother. I was a headline, a warning, a shadow being dragged out of a holy place. As they escorted me down the aisle, I locked eyes with my mother again. She was being held back by 2 neighbors, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear anymore, her face twisted in disbelief. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that I didn't blame her, that I knew this wasn't her doing. But the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I didn't know who was on my side. Outside, the sky was gray. A storm building. How poetic, I thought. Nature mourning with me. They pushed me into a black van. No windows, no voice, just darkness and the hum of an engine. Inside that vehicle, surrounded by silent strangers, I finally let myself cry. Not for the fear, not for the arrest, but for the goodbye that had been stolen. For the years I had lost, for the boy who had once run barefoot beside me and now stood in silence as I was taken away. If you've ever had a moment meant to be sacred ripped from you by betrayal or injustice, I see you. I feel your silence. Leave a comment below with the words "They stole my moment." And if you believe no one should have their humanity stripped in front of a crowd, in front of family, in front of God, subscribe to this channel. Here, your truth is heard. Your pain is honored. The ride to the detention center felt endless. I sat in the back of the van, my hands cuffed behind me, my face burning from a mix of shame and disbelief. No windows, no voices, just the steady hum of the engine and the weight of what had just happened, pressing down on my chest like a stone. I replayed it all in my head. The flowers, the casket, my mother's scream, and my brother's stare. It didn't make sense. It made too much sense. We arrived at a building that looked more like a warehouse than a facility for human beings. Cold gray walls, metal fences topped with spirals of razor wire, a gate that buzzed when it opened, loud like it was announcing your loss of freedom. They walked me inside like I was carrying something contagious. No eye contact, no explanation, just orders. Sit there, stand here, hands up, spread your legs. The processing felt designed not just to identify you, but to erase you. They took everything. My belt, my shoelaces, my wallet, my phone, even the small wooden rosary I kept in my pocket, a gift from my father when I first left home. They bagged it and told me I'd get it back if and when I left. Then came the uniform, orange, too big for my frame. It smelled like bleach and sadness. My clothes disappeared behind a metal gate. I watched them go like I was watching my identity vanish. They gave me a number, a 7-digit code. That was now who I was. Not Emilio, not son, not cook, just A254913. That number was on the plastic badge they clipped to my chest. It was on the door of the cell they walked me to. It was how they would call me from now on. Just a number. The cell was small, A concrete room with 2 metal bunks, a toilet in the corner with no lid, and a tiny sink that barely trickled water. 2 other men were already inside. They barely looked up when I entered. One was lying on the top bunk, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. The other sat on the floor, cross-legged, mumbling something in a language I didn't recognize. The door slammed shut behind me. It was cold, colder than I expected. Not just the air, but the feeling. Like the walls themselves had no memory of warmth, like the place had been built to freeze out hope. I sat on the lower bunk and stared at my hands. Red marks circled my wrists from the cuffs. They itched, but I didn't move. I was afraid that if I did, the tears would come. It wasn't until hours later that one of the men spoke. His name was Joaquin, Mexican. He had been in the center for almost 3 months, picked up after a traffic stop. He was building homes for a company that didn't care he had no papers until he asked for a raise. Then someone made a call. The other man was Samuel, from El Salvador. He had only been there for 2 weeks. He crossed the border after gang violence made it impossible for him to stay in his hometown. His brother had been killed the month before. Samuel was 21, the same age I was when I arrived in this country. We weren't supposed to be here. We weren't criminals. But this place treated everyone the same, as if we were nothing, as if we had asked for this, as if surviving was a crime. Meals were served on plastic trays, cold rice, watery beans, a piece of bread so dry it crumbled when touched. We ate sitting on our beds. There was no table, no privacy. The lights never turned off completely, making it hard to sleep, hard to think, hard to remember who you were before the silence. There were rules, unwritten ones. Do not ask too many questions. Do not look guards in the eye. Do not cry where others can see, because hope is dangerous in here, and showing pain is weakness. The worst part wasn't the noise or the food or the cold. It was the waiting. Waiting for a hearing, waiting for a phone call, waiting to know if you would be deported tomorrow or next year. Time didn't move forward in here. It just circled. I was allowed 1 phone call after 2 days. I called Marco, the owner of the restaurant I had worked at for over a decade. He was the only number I remembered by heart. When he answered, I couldn't speak. I choked on my own voice. Emilio, is that you? Are you all right? I'm in a detention center, I finally managed to say. There was silence. Then he said, I'm going to help you. I'll find someone. Stay strong. It was the first time I had felt seen in days. A few hours later, a woman came to see me, a lawyer. Her name was Diana Morales. Sharp eyes, calm voice. She sat across from me in a small room with a glass window and a metal table that was bolted to the floor. She asked for my story. I told her everything, from the first day I crossed the border, to the funeral, to the look in my brother's eyes. She didn't interrupt. She just wrote things down in a small notebook. When I finished, she leaned back and sighed. Emilio, your case is difficult. There are policies in place now that make situations like yours very hard to fight, but I will do everything I can. I nodded. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, because without that belief, all that remained was despair. Before she left, I asked if I could know who reported me. She hesitated. We believe it was someone close to you. The report included very specific details. Your full name, the address of your job, even your old apartment. I looked down at my hands again. The marks from the cuffs were there, faint now, but not forgotten. I didn't tell her what I suspected. I didn't say my brother's name, because even then, a part of me still wanted to be wrong. If you've ever felt like your entire life could be erased with 1 phone call, I'm with you. Leave a comment below with the words "they took everything in a minute." And if you believe that silence in the face of injustice is just another kind of prison, subscribe to this channel. Because here, your pain is not erased. It's remembered. On the 5th night inside that freezing cell, something shifted in me. I lay awake on the thin mattress, my body exhausted, but my mind racing. My cellmate Joaquin was snoring softly above me, and Samuel was curled in the corner, mumbling again in his sleep. I stared at the flickering light overhead, its hum like a second heartbeat in the silence. I had come here to say goodbye to my father, but now I was questioning everything I thought I knew. Not just about my family, about myself, about what I believed I had built. That night, My thoughts spiraled. Why did my brother do it? Was it hate? Was it greed? Was it something deeper? Something I had failed to see over the years because I was too busy surviving to look? My entire life in America had been built on sacrifice. I had made myself small so others could grow. I had kept my head down so my family could lift theirs up. But maybe I had spent so long giving that I forgot people will take more than you offer if they know you. Won't stop them. The next morning, a guard called my number. I followed him down the corridor to the legal interview room. Diana Morales was already waiting, files spread across the table. She looked at me differently that day. Not with pity, with urgency. I looked into something, she said, and I need you to stay calm. She handed me a printed report. It was short, just a few lines, but it might as well have been a dagger. The tip we received on your location came from a phone registered under the name Rogerio Almeida. I froze. I couldn't even pretend to be shocked. Somewhere inside, I had known. I had just hoped I was wrong, but seeing it in black and white made it real. My own brother had called immigration. My own brother had chosen my cage over my presence. There's more, she continued. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I found financial activity linked to your name that raises red flags. Unauthorized transfers. One of your old bank accounts was accessed just days before your arrest. I blinked slowly. I hadn't used that account in over a year. I thought I had closed it. Who accessed it? She paused. The same device that made the call. Your brother's phone. He transferred $8,500 to a separate account the day after your arrest. I sat there in silence, my mouth dry, my fists clenched under the table. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was calculated, coordinated. He had waited until I was physically present in the country. Exactly. Until he knew where I would be. Until the funeral. Until the moment when I would be surrounded, distracted, emotionally vulnerable. Then he had struck. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted what I had left behind. The savings I never touched. The small emergency fund I had scraped together over years of missed meals and double shifts. He had stolen my freedom and my future in the same breath. I looked at Diana. Why would he do this? She shrugged gently. Sometimes people convince themselves that the world owes them something. And when they see you as the one who owes it, they stop seeing you as family. They just see a target. I nodded slowly. The pieces fit. The coldness in his voice, the silence, the manipulation. All of it had led to this moment. What can we do? She leaned forward. You are a victim of financial fraud, identity theft. And if we can prove that your detention was the result of that crime, we may be able to apply for a U visa. It's designed for victims of crimes who are willing to help law enforcement. My stomach turned. I had heard of the U visa before. It was rare, difficult, but it was hope. So you're saying I might not be deported? I'm saying we might have a path forward, but it's narrow, and it depends on whether we can open a criminal investigation against your brother. Are you willing to do that? I didn't answer right away. How do you turn in your own brother? How do you point a finger at the person who once shared your pillow, who once cried when you scraped your knee, who once called you his hero? But how do you not? How do you stay silent when someone you love becomes the very hand that cages you? He chose this, I whispered. I didn't. That day, Diana filed the first report. Fraud, financial theft, false report to federal authorities. The process began, and with it, a strange new emotion settled in me. Not anger, not sadness, something else, a kind of quiet fury, a need to reclaim what had been taken. Not just my money, my name, humanity. Back in the cell, I told Joaquin and Samuel what had happened. They listened in silence. Then Joaquin said something that stuck with me. Some people lose their freedom to strangers. You lost yours to blood. That cuts deeper. I nodded. He was right. The wound wasn't on my skin. It was under it. Deep, sharp, quiet. Over the next few days, I gave Diana everything I had. Emails, old bank statements, copies of messages where Rogerio asked for money. Every detail I had spent years trying to forget became a tool for survival. And I realized something I hadn't seen before. My brother hadn't just betrayed me. He had erased me, piece by piece. Over time, he took advantage of my silence, my loyalty, my absence, because I had trusted him not to. And in that betrayal, he had shown me the truth, that sometimes the deepest kind of harm is not the one done out of hate. It is the one done out of convenience, out of selfishness, out of a belief that your pain does not matter as long as they get what they want. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you thought would protect you, share your truth in the comments with the words "I trusted them and they chose themselves." And if you believe stories like this should be heard, not buried, subscribe to this channel. Here, we give voice to what others want silenced. Days inside detention began to melt into each other. Time lost meaning when the lights never turned off, and every sound was either footsteps or silence. But something inside me had shifted since I decided to fight. I wasn't just sitting in a cell anymore, I was preparing. Every piece of paper, every memory, every message I could recall had become a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself, not from deportation, from erasure. Diana kept visiting, bringing updates, asking for more documents. She encouraged me to stay focused, even when things looked grim. I remember one particular day, she brought a photocopy of my work schedule from the restaurant. Marco, my old boss, had pulled it out of an old folder and sent it over. 10 years of employment. No complaints. Never late. Never absent. This could help, she said. Proof of good moral character, of community ties. It was the first time I saw her smile. But it wasn't just the paperwork that kept me going. It was the men around me. Joaquin shared his stories of his children back in Puebla, the way his daughter used to braid his hair when he came home from work. Samuel told me about a girl he left behind in El Salvador. He kept her photo folded in the sleeve of his Bible, reading her name aloud like a prayer. We were strangers, but in that place, we became something more, witnesses to each other's pain, proof that we existed. One evening, a new man arrived in our cell block. His name was Carlos. Young, maybe 25. He looked scared, raw, like someone who had just been ripped out of the world without warning. That night, he didn't speak, just sat on the edge of the bed and stared, his shoes. The next day, he broke down. They got me at work, he said through tears. One of the cooks reported me, said I was stealing shifts. I wasn't. I swear I wasn't. I believed him. We all did. Because in that place, truth had a certain tone. You could hear it, in the tremble of the voice, in the way the eyes moved. There was no need to lie anymore. There was nothing left to gain. Carlos reminded me of myself when I first got there. Lost, humiliated, betrayed. I realized how many stories as I listened to him speak started the same way. Not with crime, not with violence, but with trust, misplaced trust. A friend, a boss, a neighbor, a family member, someone who knew just enough to destroy you. The more I listened, the more I saw how common it was. Betrayal wasn't the exception. It was the rule, and not just from strangers, from the people who should have protected us. That thought kept me awake that night. I thought of Rogerio, not as the man who betrayed me, but as the boy who once used to sleep next to me, our feet touching under the thin blanket. I remembered how he used to get scared during storms and crawl into my bed, how he would beg me to tell stories until he fell asleep. What happened to that boy? Was he ever really there? Or did I just imagine him because I needed to believe in something? The truth is, there are two kinds of betrayal. One you see coming, like a storm on the horizon. The other arrives like a knife in the dark, from the hand you once held. I was learning to live with both. Diana came back the following week with more news. ICE had reviewed my case. They weren't ready to release me yet, but the fraud investigation had been formally opened. That meant something. It meant I wasn't just a detainee anymore. I was a witness, a survivor of a crime. That changed the way they had to treat my file. But it also meant I had to relive everything, again, in detail. She prepared me for the interview with the investigator, told me to stay calm, to answer honestly, to not let the emotions overtake me. But how do you speak calmly about being betrayed by your own brother? How do you describe, in legal terms, the moment you realized your goodbye to your father was used as bait? The investigator came in wearing a suit and holding a tablet. His voice was neutral, professional. He asked questions like he was reading from a script, but every question felt like a blade. Did your brother know your immigration status? Yes. Did he know where you would be that day? Yes. Did he ever threaten to report you? Not directly, but he implied it. Did he have access to your personal documents? Yes. He helped me open my first account when I arrived. He had my information. Do you believe he intended to have you removed? Yes. I answered each one with the same voice, calm, even. But inside, I was breaking all over again. Every word felt like stepping barefoot on broken glass. I wasn't just building a case, I was tearing
Wounds.
open. After the interview, I went back to my cell and lay down. I didn't speak to anyone that night. I just stared at the ceiling and thought about everything I had lost. My freedom, my job, my money, my family, my chance to say goodbye. But what hurt most wasn't what was taken. It was what had never been seen. All those years, all those hours, the sacrifices, the silence, the loneliness. None of it had mattered to the one person I thought would understand. Rogerio hadn't just taken my money. He had taken my name and dragged it through the dirt. He had made me a villain in a story where I was the one bleeding. If you've ever had to defend yourself against the people who should have stood beside you, write in the comments, "I became my own defense." Your words might be the voice someone else is too scared to use. And if this story feels like a piece of your own, subscribe to the channel. Because here, no betrayal is too small to name, and no pain is too invisible to be honored. The hardest part about healing is that it rarely looks like progress. It's not loud. It doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it's just waking up in the same cold cell and realizing that your heart hurts a little less than it did the day before, or that you remembered to breathe, or that you ate your food without feeling like it might come back up. That was where I found myself after weeks of silence and reflection. Not better, just a little less broken. I had stopped expecting justice to come quickly. I no longer stared at the door waiting for news. I focused on what I could control: my thoughts, my memories, my truth. Diana continued fighting on my behalf. Her updates were cautious but hopeful. The U-visa process was moving slowly. We still needed more documentation, and the fraud case had to be validated by law enforcement. But there was movement. That was more than most people inside those walls had. In that place, any news that wasn't bad felt like a gift. One morning, as I sat with my tray of watery oatmeal and dried toast, a guard approached my cell. His tone was different, not aggressive, almost respectful. "You have a visitor." I wasn't expecting anyone. My stomach knotted. Visitors in detention are rare, and when they come, it's usually not good. They brought me to a small room with a glass window and a plastic chair. On the other side sat someone I hadn't seen in over 10 years. My cousin Rafael. He was always the quiet one. He grew up in the same neighborhood as me and Rogerio. When we were kids, he followed us around like a shadow. But he moved to São Paulo young, and we lost touch after I left for the U.S. He looked older now, tired, but there was kindness in his eyes. I didn't know who else to reach out to. He said softly, "I had to come. I needed you to know. It wasn't just betrayal. It was planned." Rogerio talked about it for weeks. He told people he was going to take everything. He bragged that you wouldn't see it coming. I clenched my fists in my lap. My jaw tightened. He said you abandoned the family, that you owed him. But I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how far he'd go. I swallowed hard, trying not to let the emotion overwhelm me. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Just hearing that someone knew, that someone saw, it means more than you know." Raphael nodded. "I have messages, screenshots, things he sent me, proof. I gave them to your lawyer. She's building your case." I wanted to hug him, but the glass between us didn't allow it. So I just pressed my hand to the window, and he pressed his to the other side. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about all the times I had doubted myself, all the nights I wondered if I was imagining the malice in Rogerio's voice, the manipulation, the coldness. But now I had confirmation, and it hurt. It hurt more than I thought it would, because betrayal is bad enough. But knowing it was deliberate, calculated, spoken out loud like a plan. It changes you. I kept thinking about something my father once told me when I was a boy. He said, "Trust is like a plate. You can drop it once and glue it back together. But if you drop it again and again, eventually all you're holding is dust." That's what my relationship with Rogerio had become. Dust. Over the next few days, Diana and I worked harder than ever. With the new evidence Raphael provided, we filed a supplemental claim. Text messages, voice notes, even a recorded conversation where Rogerio admitted he was glad I was gone, that he had done what needed to be done. It was painful listening to that voice, familiar and venomous at the same time, but I didn't flinch. I used it. I turned every word into fuel. And with each step forward, I began to reclaim something I hadn't felt in weeks: dignity. Not because I was winning, but because I had stopped hiding. I had stopped carrying the shame that didn't belong to me. Joaquin noticed it first. "You're standing straighter," he said one night. "I guess I'm remembering who I am." "Good, because they tried to take that from you." He was right. They had tried, and almost succeeded. But I had survived too much to let betrayal define the ending of my story. If you've ever had to dig through lies to find your truth, leave a comment with the words I held onto myself, because even in the darkest place, your voice matters. And if you believe stories like this can heal others as they have helped you, subscribe to the channel. Because here, we turn silence into strength and wounds into witnesses. The judge's words hit me like ice in a desert. "Removal authorized," he declared, his gavel echoing in the chamber like a verdict of death. For years I had built my life around work, sacrifice, sending money home, believing that love meant keeping silent and giving more than anyone knew. And now, all of it could be wiped away in a moment. I felt the weight of the papers in front of me, my name, my charge, the statute accusing me of being removable or lacking lawful status. When I left the courtroom, I walked slower than I had arrived. My job at the restaurant, the decade of nights mopping floors, the rentals of shared rooms, and the dinners I skipped, they all followed me out. Outside the concrete walls, the air tasted like regret. My mind raced with questions no one asked. Did that certificate matter now? The one that said I had been employed for 10 years, legally? It had once been a badge of pride. Now, it felt like dust in my own hand. They told me I had 30 days to depart voluntarily. That was the standard removal period under law. My attorney explained it quietly. If I did not leave on my own, they would pick me up, they said, and put me on a plane. 30 days. That's 720 hours. That's less than some marriages. I counted the hours one by one, each second a tick toward the unknown. At night, I lay awake in the cell, the orange jumpsuit feeling heavier than any chain. I thought about my father. I pictured his hands, calloused, strong, always ready to help. I heard his voice. He would say, "Son, you must walk proud." I tried to believe it, but tonight, pride felt like a mask. My fear was growing into something monstrous. When the official came to deliver the paperwork, I saw his eyes flicker, just once, like pity or maybe curiosity. They asked for fingerprints, a photo, confirmed address. I gave them, because until it was over, I was cooperating. Until there was no path, I had to keep holding on. Brought me a folder of options. We talked about motions to reconsider, appeals to the Board of Immigration Appeals, trying to extend the 30-day period. But the judge made it clear, findings of removability were final unless appealed within 30 days. I had that window. But filing paperwork in a detention center is like starting a race with your feet tied. Every signature, every document had to be requested, mailed, scanned, verified. Time wasn't just running out, it was sprinting. And while the betrayal underneath was like a serpent in my ribs, that the man who stood next to me as a child, the one I believed would always protect me, was the one who handed me over, the one who made the call. I replayed his face in the church, the shadows, the phone, the agents walking in. That memory was the anchor chaining me deeper. My attorney said, "We've found new evidence. The fraud case, the financial transfers. It may shift the narrative. It may give you relief from removal if we succeed. But it is not guaranteed. It is long. It is uncertain." I nodded. I felt hollow. We prepared for a hearing. They scheduled it. It was a moment in the bright courtroom where I felt young again. Just a man standing in front of a system built to erase him. The government attorney pointed to the paper. The judge asked if I understood the rights I was giving away. I said yes, because I had no more tears left for truth. When they called me by number, respondent number A254913, I felt every label fall like weights. I was not a name. I was a case, a file, a removal target. My story, the one of crossing deserts, working through nights, sending money home, was irrelevant now. All that mattered was the statute, the policy, the box that permitted removal. And yet, behind the walls of the court, I felt something stir. Not hope, exactly. Something quieter, a memory of sweeping the floor and hearing my father say thank you, of waking before dawn and seeing the sun come up, of holding the phone
Send money
to and hearing my mother say, "You are my hero." Those memories were mine. They were testimony. So I leaned into them. I gave my attorney everything I had: work records, bank statements, text conversations, the name of the man who betrayed me. I told her again the story of the flowers on the coffin, the church, the look in my brother's eyes. I let the shame come out, because words hold power when you don't bury them. If you have ever felt the ground shift under your feet because of someone you trusted, share in the comments. I was betrayed, but I still remain. And if this story reaches you even just a little, subscribe to the channel, because here we remember what they tried to erase, and we fight back one day at a time. It is a strange thing, waiting to be erased. To know the clock is ticking and every second brings you closer to a border you once crossed with nothing but a backpack and a prayer. But now, I wasn't the boy chasing a dream. I was the man staring down a system that didn't care how many nights I went hungry so my family could eat. It didn't care how many roofs I fixed, or how many meals I cooked, or how many taxes I paid. All it saw was a number, a case file, a foreign body to be removed. The weeks following the judge's ruling felt like an invisible coffin lowering, inch by inch. Every conversation with Diana became more urgent. We needed affidavits. We needed more proof of fraud. We needed someone, anyone, to testify that I was not the criminal they were trying to paint me as. But people outside were afraid. Employers feared ICE. Friends vanished when asked to speak on the record. And family? The one person who could clear everything up had already betrayed me in front of a church full of mourners. Rogerio had gone quiet. He wasn't answering calls. His social media accounts had gone private. But the damage was done. His fingerprints were all over my downfall. Diana believed that if we could get law enforcement to investigate him formally, we could buy more time, maybe even halt the deportation. But it all rested on cooperation from the local police and their willingness to treat a detained immigrant's word as credible. Meanwhile, inside the detention center, things were shifting. You could feel the tension in the air. Rumors flew fast. 2 men had been taken away in the middle of the night. 1 deported. 1 moved to a high-security facility. No explanation. Just names called, beds emptied, stories ended. I kept my head down and my ears open. Every word mattered. Every piece of gossip could be a signal. One morning, Samuel, who had barely spoken since his denial, walked up to me and said something I didn't expect. "I think you'll make it out," he said. "You're still fighting." I wanted to believe him, but I had been fighting my whole life, and sometimes I didn't know what I was even fighting for anymore. Later that week, Diana came back with an update. It wasn't good news. Not exactly. The immigration office had denied our request for a stay of removal. They saw no urgent humanitarian reason to delay the order. But, she said, the fraud investigation was still open. That meant there was still a legal contradiction in place. 2 systems giving 2 different answers. And that contradiction, she explained, could be our last card. If the Department of Homeland Security confirmed I was a victim of crime, it could shift my classification. It could open the door to prosecutorial discretion, meaning they could choose not to deport me based on compassion, on evidence, on moral grounds. But compassion in immigration is a currency rarely spent. So she gave me one last assignment. Write a declaration. In my words, my story. Not legal language, not statistics. Just the truth. Everything that happened. Everything I lost. Everything I still hoped for. I sat with a pen and a sheet of paper on a metal table under flickering fluorescent lights, and for the first time in weeks, I let the words pour out. I wrote about the desert I crossed to get here, the moment I stepped onto U.S. soil and felt both freedom and fear wrap around me like twin shadows. I wrote about the first job I took washing dishes for 12 hours straight, the burns on my hands, the coins in my pocket, the pride I carried home. I wrote about my mother, her voice over the phone telling me I made her proud, how I used to send her money every month, folded into small envelopes that crossed borders to become medicine, groceries, school books, or nieces I would never meet. I wrote about Rogerio, the laughter we shared as boys, the night he cried in my arms after our father hit him, and the moment I realized that same boy had grown into a man who could trade me for money, and silence. I wrote about the church, the funeral, the roses in my hand, the metal of the cuffs, and I ended it with this: if I am to be sent away, let it not be because I was silent. Let it not be because I didn't matter. Let it not be because my pain was too inconvenient to be heard. I handed it to Diana. She read it in silence, and then she looked at me, her eyes glassy. "You did more than tell your story," she said. "You reminded them that you're still human." The next day, she submitted it, along with the final appeal. The clock kept ticking, but something was different. Not because I was safe, but because I had stopped shrinking. I had used my voice. Inside those walls, I watched men lose everything: hope, family, faith. I had almost things too, but now I understood. You cannot wait for someone to rescue you from a system designed to forget you. You must stand and make yourself unforgettable. If you have ever had to fight to prove that your pain mattered, leave a comment with the words "I told my truth," and they heard it. And if you believe that courage is not measured by who wins, but by who refuses to disappear, subscribe to the channel. Because here, your voice is a shield, and your story is your strongest weapon. The days leading up to the final decision felt like walking barefoot across glass. You try to move slowly, carefully, but pain still comes with every step. The difference now was that I wasn't numb anymore. I was present, awake. The kind of awake that only comes when you've been so close to losing everything that even breathing feels like a small act of defiance. Diana called in one afternoon. She looked tired, not defeated, but weathered, like someone who had been holding up the weight of too many people's futures and still found space to carry mine. She said she had spoken again to the local law enforcement agency. They had reviewed the evidence submitted, the text messages, the financial transfers, the testimony from my cousin Raphael, and my written declaration. And after weeks of silence, they had made a statement. Not an arrest, not a press conference, just one sentence on official letterhead. "We believe a crime may have occurred and are opening a formal investigation." That one sentence changed everything. It meant the government could no longer treat my case as simple. I wasn't just a person out of status. I was now a potential crime victim cooperating with an open investigation. Under the U-Visa framework, that gave me protections, not immunity, not certainty, but time. And in a place where time was the most precious currency, that meant hope. That night, I didn't sleep. But it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was something closer to grief. Grief for the years lost, for the silence I had swallowed, for the father I had buried with chains around my wrists. I kept replaying the moment I saw his casket from across the aisle, the way the sunlight hit the wood, the white lilies wilting in the heat. The memory refused to fade. The following morning, Diana came back with a new document. It was not a release order, but it was the next best thing. A deferred action request had been filed on my behalf. If granted, it meant I would not be deported while the investigation continued. It also meant I could apply for work authorization. After months of being caged like an animal, the idea of legally being allowed to work again felt like freedom. In the detention center, word travels fast. Within hours, others were asking me how I did it. Not out of jealousy, out of desperation. They wanted to believe there was still a way out, that the system didn't just crush you and move on. And in those moments, I saw what this place really was. Not just a prison, a graveyard of potential, of dreams, of men who came looking for survival and found punishment instead. I spent the next days helping Joaquin write his own declaration. He had never told his story before, not fully, but when he did, it poured out like floodwater. The abuse, the threats, the forced labor. His hands trembled as he wrote, but when he finished, he said something that stuck with me. Maybe they won't believe me, but I believe me now. That is what survival looks like. Always winning, but refusing to forget your own worth. Soon after, I was called into the interview room again. This time it wasn't ICE. It was a representative from the local DA's office sent to gather more information about Rogerio. They asked me questions I never thought I'd have to answer about my own brother. His behavior, his motives, the timeline, the financial manipulation. It felt like betraying blood. But then I remembered something my father once told me when I was a teenager and caught stealing mangoes from a neighbor's tree. Doing what is right is never betrayal. Betrayal is pretending wrong is okay. That day, I let the truth speak. Not because I hated Rogerio, but because I refused to be quiet anymore. After the interview, they gave me a moment outside. Just 5 minutes in the open air. I hadn't seen the sky without bars in months. It was overcast. The clouds looked like bruises, but the wind touched my face, and I remembered what it felt like to exist beyond concrete. When I returned to my unit, Carlos approached me, the young man who had arrived so scared, so silent. He hugged me. No words, just the kind of embrace that says everything. We both understood something most people never will, that silence can kill. But truth, even when it hurts, and free. In those final days, I started to write again. Letters to my mother. Stories about the center, about the men, about the things I had seen. I didn't know what would happen next. Whether the U visa would be approved, whether the investigation would lead to anything. But I knew this. I had survived the deepest betrayal, the darkest hours, the sharpest pain. And I was still standing. If you have ever found light inside a place built to keep you in darkness, write in the comments, "I survived the silence." And if you know someone whose voice has been buried by fear, invite them to this space. Subscribe to this channel, where every story is a heartbeat. And every heartbeat reminds the world that we are still here. The day they called my name, it did not sound like a release. It sounded like a memory being returned to me. I walked toward the exit, without knowing what would be waiting on the other side. No crowd, no celebration, just silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't the silence of fear or shame. It was the quiet that comes after surviving a storm. The kind of quiet where you realize the world is still standing. And somehow, so are you. Diana met me outside with a folder in her hand and tears in her eyes. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. That folder contained my deferred action notice, a paper that didn't promise the future, but allowed it. A paper that said I could walk freely, at least for now, that I could breathe without flinching at every siren, that maybe, just maybe, I could begin to build again. I walked to the nearest bus station, sat down on a bench, and looked up at the sky. For months, I had seen it only through steel mesh. Now it stretched wide and open, indifferent and infinite. I closed my eyes and let the sun hit my face. For the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to rest. The bus ride was quiet. I watched the world through the window like someone seeing it for the first time. A child holding his mother's hand. A man selling fruit on the corner. A woman laughing into her phone. Everyday moments, once invisible to me, now looked like miracles. When I arrived at the small apartment Diana helped me find, I stepped inside and sat on the floor. No furniture, no noise, just me. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just breathed, in, out, and with every breath, I let go of another layer of fear. Over the next few days, I began putting the pieces back together. I started volunteering at a community center that helped recently released immigrants. I listened to their stories, helped them fill out forms, translated when I could, and I shared my own story. Not for sympathy, but because stories are seeds. And sometimes, the only thing more powerful than surviving is planting something that might help someone else survive too. Raphael called. We spoke for an hour. He apologized again, not for what he had done, but for what he hadn't done sooner. I told him I forgave him, because holding on to anger only anchors you to pain, and I had spent enough time in chains. One evening, I sat with a notebook in my lap and wrote a letter to my father, told him about everything, the betrayal, the cell, the courtroom, the letter I wrote on that cold metal table. I told him I never got to say goodbye, that the last image I have of him is a closed casket and the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. But I also told him something else. I'm still here, Pi. I didn't give up. I didn't disappear. There are no perfect endings for people like us. We don't ride into sunsets. We don't get parades. What we get is quieter, but just as holy. To walk forward with our heads up, to become the stories we once needed to hear. To everyone who has walked with me through this journey, thank you. To those who listened when the world tried to silence my voice, I see you. To the ones who know what it feels like to be betrayed by blood, but saved by strangers, you are not alone. If you found pieces of yourself in this story, please leave a comment saying, "I'm still standing." Your voice matters, your pain matters, and your healing matters. If this journey moved you, subscribe to this channel. Because we are building more than just stories here. We are building refuge, memory, resistance, and before you go, click on the next video appearing on your screen. There is more to be heard, more to be felt, and maybe, just maybe, something waiting that reminds you of the strength still living inside you. Thank you for staying. Thank you for believing. Until next time.